All right, so we are here today with Alex Fitzgerald, Assassinato Online. Go ahead and tell us what we're going to be talking about today.
Today, everybody, we're going to be talking about blind defense and why that is such an important facet to your game that you need to incorporate. And yeah, do you want to say anything else on that, or should we go to the next slide, Mr. Little?
Well, I've sort of studied from you a bit. You may not know it, but I've studied from you a decent amount when it comes to blind defense, and I'm certainly happy with the way things have been going for me. It feels a lot better knowing that you can fight for your blinds, defend your blinds, and your opponents can't just run you over.
That's great to hear. That I was just saying before, I was talking to a man. I think he's a little older, but I was talking to him earlier, and the part of my job I like the most is when people get the look on their face like I get it. You know what I mean? But yeah, I can run it. Yeah, you don't have to get run over. For a long time, it was just kind of accepted theory that you got run over in the blinds. It was kind of, everybody was a position Nazi that said like, oh, how dare you call out a position? And really there was a lot of mathematics backing up. Like if you watch like very early Gus Hansen when he was like taking over poker tournaments, one of the things he really insisted upon that other people were not very keen on was how often he called out of the big blind, and everybody made fun of him. And actually the latest mathematics really confirmed what he was doing was actually pretty correct. Now, obviously, he probably has some other things in his game that I'd rather cut out if I was working with him. But that particular, I mean, that's something you'll see like a lot of the pros do that you won't see like the young, a lot of the guys that are, I would say, more classically trained when it comes to MTTs. That's something they're really resistant toward. And I don't really see the logic behind it once I did a little of the math. Should we get to the next slide?
Yeah, let's hop right into it.
All right, let's do this.
Who are you? Everyone wants to know who you are.
All right. Well, hey guys, my name is Alexander Fitzgerald. You might know me from such films as Master Poker with 1 hour a day or Test Your Poker. Your friends may have referred to me as that jackass who 4-bet me. And yeah, if we go to the next slide, my story. I began playing poker in 2003 in my high school cafeteria. I went pro in 2006, the year I graduated high school.
Well, so slow down. Tell us about a cafeteria poker game.
Okay, a cafeteria poker game. Yeah, that's a good story. Well, I was trying to do the metal thing at the time, so I was in this like doom metal project, and my boy, he was the drummer. He was a big old dude, and he'd sit like Buddha up in the, like our school was so overcrowded, we'd all be like, there's like a hall that leads into the offices, and like literally 200 of us would each eat lunch there because there was no like tables, right? So we'd all be sitting there, and he was posted up. And then one day, I'm not really sure why, but a poker game started coming up around him. Like, and he wasn't even playing. He was just like proceeding over it. Like, I mean, he was just watching it like the emperor, right? And I was like, how does this game work? I didn't know if a flush beat is straight, right? But I saw these kids had a little money. They were not like, you know, a lot of people talk about, if you guys know the high school in, I'm from the Bothell-Kenmore area, kind of right on the line. It's pretty much most famous for kind of birthing the grunge movement. There was a lot of bands from Bothell. Otherwise, it's a pretty sleepy town. It's definitely a little boring. But yeah, that was where I grew up most of the time, just kind of in a little suburb. And eventually, anyway, they had a little money. Everybody says they had like crazy money in that area. That's not really true. That's more like Mercer Island, Bellevue, in that part of Washington. But like these kids would throw like $4 or $5 around like it was nothing. Like $4 or $5 to me was like an hour of my job at Arby's. So, and they all played on credit, which was really good because, you know, people throw chips around a lot more because it doesn't feel like real money. But if you don't even have to touch it or anything, you just go by credit, you don't feel like it's anything, period, right? So people would do this thing where it was like the ante was 10 cents. You had to like call 10 cents to begin with, right? Otherwise, you could fold your hand. Nobody folded. So there'd be like, you know, there'd be like 12 people to a hand sometimes. So it'd be like $1.20 to begin with. And I got curious. I was like, what happens if you just raise, right? And then people started folding to me because they would call to see the flop and they would just fold. And things started working out pretty well. And it was the first game, I didn't even have money to pay anyone, but I figured, you know, I'll get something from my paycheck and I'll pay someone. I'm really thankful for that because I wasn't really that into it to begin with. But then, yeah, eventually I started realizing these kids all had like $5, I realized their parents would give them like $5, $10 to go to school. They'd be like, yeah, go get your muffin, your coffee at Starbucks, get your lunch, and I'll see you at home. And it just became my goal in high school to like take that $10 from them before they went home. You know what I mean? So I would create wild card games in the back of class that everybody would think like four of a kind was the nuts when if there's like three classifications of live cards, that's kind of like your minimum entry requirements. And obviously if they had like two pair, it was just absolutely nothing. But like if you grew up playing like 5-card draw with your parents, two pair is a huge hand, so they would just overvalue their hands constantly. Then at some point it got to the point where like I had a list of like 40, 45 people that owed me $1 to $20 around the school. And my job in between classes, I would like cut class like 3 minutes early just to like wait outside of people's classrooms and be like, hey, you got a 10 spot? Like, I need that right now, right? Like, don't be ducking me. And it was the greatest kids to play poker with were the Mormon kids because they had no upbringing with card playing. They all loved gambling because it wasn't allowed. And I could always just threaten to tell their parents if they ever didn't pay me. And next day, they'd have that $10 ready. And they were doing pretty well. By the way, a lot of them are still my good friends to this day, and they're wonderful people. They were just, they still give me a hard time about how much of a hard time I gave them back then. But yeah, that was kind of high school cafeteria poker. It was a good time. And then I'd start doing the home game circuit. And the home game circuit is where I got my ass handed to me because people actually knew a couple things about poker and I did not. So that's when I went to the local library and they had like a computer where you could like order books that you could read. And I think it was like 83 books to read about poker. And I read all of them back to back in 1 year. So yeah, anyway, I guess we should go to the next slide.
Yes.
All right. I have 3.8 million in tournament earnings across EPT final tables, multiple W Coupe and F-Tops final tables, and most majors online. And if we can go to the next slide, I do have something else to say. If we could go to this slide, we're not that different. I don't know. I get weird talking about like, I do have multiple F-Tops final tables. I do have multiple W Coupe final tables. I have a 5K event final table of the PCA. I did final table in EPT. I nearly final table 2 others. I do have live tournament wins. I have final table the Sunday Million, the warm up, the Sunday Second Chance. I won.
All right, we get it. You're amazing.
Yeah. I'm sick. don't ever forget it. But I mean, something I want to say, like I say that just to kind of correspond with this. While that may sound daunting, if I'm not watching the thing. Are you on the slide that says we're not that different?
Yes, I'm keeping up. Don't worry about me.
All right, cool, man. Just making sure. While that may sound daunting, I started out as a failed freelance writer. Like a lot of people think like, oh man, you were doing really well from an early age. And it's like, well, it took me a really long time to figure it out. When I moved to Seattle when I was 18 years old, well, first off, I moved out of my house when I was in high school. So I moved to a place called Casino Road, Everett, because that's where I could afford rent. Go ahead and look it up sometime. It was a garage with no, there was no heating, there was no plumbing. So every time I had to go to the bathroom, I had to run across the street and take a leak in the bushes. Fortunately, there was a bathroom available for the other bodily thing, but I'd have to like go to my landlord's house, knock on the door, get them to unlock it. So I wasn't going to do that 20 times a night while they were trying to sleep. But yeah, that's where, hold on one second, guys. Bye, baby. Have a good day.
Bye. Have a good day.
Yeah. That wasn't for you, John. I don't call you baby on the first date. Now, anyway, yeah. So essentially, that was. She said bye. By the way, she said bye. She heard you a bit, but yeah. So anyway, essentially. I moved to Seattle when I was 18. I made a little bit of money commercial fishing. I wasn't making it from poker. And I was there to become a freelance writer, and I failed at that. And it wasn't like I was trying like from new to become a freelance writer. I've been a music journalist, a video game journalist. Like I wrote for a lot of different video game publications. I wrote for a lot of different magazines, stuff like that. And I just couldn't make it work. I couldn't pay my bills with it. My first 3 years of playing poker from like 14 and a half to like 17 and a half, 18. I didn't make money at the game. I'd always make money for like home games and to pay for a couple things, and I'd go broke constantly. My first year as a pro, my first year playing professionally, I did not win for the first 6 months. I almost went back to my job in security. So yeah, it was definitely. So it sounds like pretty daunting where I got to, but a lot of this is just hard work and putting your mind on it. And if we could go to the next slide.
Try to sit up for me too.
Yeah, my bad. I have really bad posture. Sorry about that. And woo, all right. You can if you guys ever can hear the, I think my neighbor's mowing like the 2 square meters he has of lawn, so it probably shouldn't take that long. But if y'all can hear it, just let me know. I'll try to like close some windows or something.
No, it's good enough. We hear it, but it'll be gone soon enough. No problem.
Okay, good. Okay, so we're on the slide when I began in poker.
Yep.
When I began in poker in home games growing up, I wasn't close to the best player. This is another thing. They all kind of, a lot of people assume I was some kind of prodigy. That's not true. I got my ass handed to me constantly. My arch nemesis in my high school was these kids in basketball. The kids who played basketball growing up, I didn't know this, but to travel to like areas where there were competitive games, they would have to take like 3-hour bus rides. And they would just play cards the entire way. So, poker got popular in our school, but they had a couple-year head start. And I would go to their games and they would just like take every dollar I had, right? And then there was a local guy who was throwing like poker tournaments with like, I'm not even joking, like 8 to 20 people normally, not 99% of the time. I played 50 of those without winning one, okay? So I was definitely, I was so dumb, dude. I had like the stereo headphones and I had the sunglasses, and when I was done, I was reading a poker book and they were like, man, this kid's a nerd, you know what I mean? Like which was true, I was a nerd, but like I don't know, I was having fun, so I didn't really care. But yeah, anyway. I mean, I used to be a bit tilty, but like I just kind of wanted to be somewhere where something was going on, because there wasn't a whole lot going on in my typical life. I just wasn't really making progress on anything else. Didn't look like I was going to go to college. I was working a dead-end job at Arby's. The chick I was with at the time, her family was kind of like, it's your religion or him, and she took probably the right decision and said it's my religion, but yeah, it was not a good time. So I was just kind of escaping into poker, and it was good because it took me a real long time to figure it out, but I was having a good time the whole time. And this even carried into my professional career. I remember I was pretty surprised I had a reputation, because I don't watch poker on my off hours. I don't pay attention to the forums. It's kind of my job. You know what I mean? Like Vin Scully, when he's done calling a Dodgers game, doesn't go watch baseball. He's checking out. Nobody's going to catch that reference. I know a lot of y'all are Europeans, but we have like a famous announcer in the United States who's been calling baseball games for 50 years. And he does everything but watch baseball when he's done. And I think that makes him much better at his job, because he calls from experience from everything else. Whereas there's a lot of like baseball announcers in America that are just pure baseball fans. And I think they really lose touch with who they're working with, just because they just live in that universe. But yeah, anyway, I got there. I realized I had a reputation, and my reputation, none of y'all are going to believe this given my reputation now, but it was a nut peddler, like just like biggest nit that ever walked the earth. Like, sloppy, wins ugly, not really sure how he wins, takes every cheap trick you can go with. And, I'm pretty proud of that reputation these days, because these guys had 10 times my talent and weren't making my money. But at the time, I really thought I was a good poker player. So to hear, which was the truth, I wasn't very like book smart. Like, despite all the books I'd read, my style was pretty sloppy. I didn't really have, like, the 2+2 kids at that time had a really good way of looking at poker, and I didn't read forums, so I had no idea how they were doing it, right? And they were much, much better than I was. But so what I'm trying to say is it took me a good 4 or 5 years to get moving. So if you guys are at the beginning of your poker journey, it's not working out, just, I mean, has anybody here ever had like something they would really love to commit time to that they can't, like I did with freelance writing? I bet a lot of you guys have. Have a lot of you guys played poker for 3 or 4 years and haven't had like outstanding results? Well, I did the exact same thing. So a lot of this, what I'm trying to tell you is a lot of this stuff doesn't take seeing into anybody's soul. It's just all about good old fashioned hard work. And if we can go to natural talent is overrated, the next slide. I have never been blessed with natural talent. One of my favorite quotes of all time, if not my favorite quote of all time, is, if you knew how hard I had to work to attain my mastery, it would not seem so wonderful at all. I dreamed of the day I would not be scared of anybody at a no limit hold'em table, unless I somehow get on a table with, like 25, 50 players that have been playing their whole lives like that high. That doesn't really happen, and I'm not going to be playing those games with those people. I have played with a lot of like high stakes cash game pros in tournaments, and just because the amount we bought in for is fixed, I don't really get worried about them. And I always thought once I got to that place mentally, I always thought that would be like a huge mental edge. But the truth is, it is a huge mental edge, but you don't feel like you're a very smart person when you knew how hard you had to work for it. And let me get my assistant to close the front door, and not trying to draw attention to it. But yeah, let's go ahead to why talent is overrated, the next slide. The math required to start outplaying your opponents requires an eighth grader's understanding. Now, people always wonder, where did you get the eighth grader's understanding of mathematics? Where did that... Cierra la puerta, por favor, fe. Gracias, muy amable. Essentially, for fun, I started going to college classes when I was doing pretty well. When I was like 19 or 20, I was still living in the U district of Seattle for fun. And I just wanted to go to some classes for fun. And I had to take an entrance exam. And I was like, I wonder how good my math is. They said, you have to go back to ninth grade mathematics when I was done, right? They were like, you're absolutely horrible when it comes to math. And I blame my high school teachers. I don't know why it's for some reason acceptable to get like student teachers like every single year you're being taught, but they certainly thought that was a good idea. And I couldn't do some basic stuff when I took that test. But really basic algebra is pretty much all this takes. And when it gets slightly more complex, all you have to do is like Google a few things and you'll get it. You can get it within about 4 minutes. And here's the best part. Poker would be a lot tougher if anybody was doing this kind of work, but no one is doing this kind of work. You will be ahead of 99.9% of players. Like literally, like you will be the 1 out of 1,000, okay, if you can do this kind of work.
I just want to chime in and say that I can confirm this.
Go ahead.
Well, a lot of people do not do work away from the table. They just show up, they play poker,
Period.
and they pray that they win. And, a lot of them, if everyone does that, you'll probably be okay if you do that. But the way you get really good is by studying away from the table and figuring out how to play at the table.
For sure. And Jonathan Little does a lot of that, and he's done a lot of that from the beginning, which is why I think he excelled. Like when he, we were definitely, all of us were young and just kind of playing. He was like doing a lot of studying. Eventually, I kind of like crashed and burned in my career, and I had to start studying a lot more just because I realized I couldn't wing it anymore. It was about like 2009, 2010. I think Jonathan would agree with this. You just couldn't keep winging it as much. You remember that? Like it started getting a little more tougher, or maybe you could because you were a little further ahead of me. But like a lot of people couldn't start. It was right around Black Friday. You really had to be on your game, especially the Europeans came in with much more like traditional, like scholastic temperaments, you know what I mean? Really into the study. Sorry, I feel like you keep trying to say something. I keep cutting you off. My bad.
No, it's okay. I mean, I was just thinking that it's true. Right around Black Friday, that's when you really had to be great at poker to stay alive, is what it amounted to, especially online. I mean, live, you never have had to be great to do well. But online, I mean, that's when the games really did go from being marginally tough to nearly unbeatable, unless you're just really, really good.
Right. And I think this is kind of off topic, guys, but a lot of people always go like, why aren't you playing like more high stakes tournaments? First of all, like there's probably more money in high stakes tournaments, but like the variance involved and like what it does to my psyche is not worth it. I would rather play like no. I mean, if there's a big field like 500 or like 215, I'll obviously play that, right? But like, I'm not gunning for like every high stakes scoop. I did not play a lot of the high stakes scoop this year just because it's like, why do I want to pass around coolers with me and 124 of my buddies for tens of thousands of dollars? You know, it's just not worth it. However, like the hundreds, the fifties on like different websites, right? Like America's Card Room, 888, Titan Poker, Party Poker. They have a lot of bad players, and that was kind of Poker Stars used to bring in a lot of American players, and a lot of the American players just kind of played for fun. And right around Black Friday, that obviously got zapped out of the economy, and what you were left with was a lot of these like Latvian kids working med school hours to try to figure this out. Because if if me and Jonathan Little make $2,000 a month, like we're pretty screwed, you know what I mean? But like if a Latvian kid makes $2,000 a month, like he's renting 3 or 4 different homes, you know what I mean? Maybe Latvia is a pretty good economy right now. I know a lot of Latvians, so I always give them a hard time, you know what I mean? But like the example is there. Like if you like the average salary for a lawyer in Romania is like $500 a month. So if they're making like $3,000 a month, they are doing extremely well. You know what I mean? You think about somebody in the United States who's making 6 times what a lawyer makes. It's like, woo, this guy's doing good. You know, so they were coming in with their incredible, I thought really incredible like work ethic. And even if they weren't like at absolute mastery, they were definitely like creating some problems, and you had to really know what you were doing. So do you have any questions, or do you want to go to the next slide?
No, let's go ahead and talk about why blind defense is important.
Yeah, let's talk about it. If you fold every single hand from under the gun pre-ante, you will lose nothing. While it would be a very bad strategy to fold pocket aces, you would not be losing anything. If you fold every single big blind, you will be losing 100 big blinds per 100 hands. That is quite a difference.
Well, so what is a reasonable win rate for most people, just so we can show that 100 big blinds per 100 losing is significant?
A reasonable win rate. That's an excellent question. Like a decent player, like a guy who plays live some and plays online some and knows a little something, will be losing it'll be like -40 out of the big blind, right? They're saving like 6 big blinds out of 10. That's pretty good. Like a high stakes player.
Come back to the webcam for me.
Yeah, sorry. I was trying to get my dogs to stop, moshing. Yeah. So anyway, I keep forgetting. I never see my webcam. So anyway, I never use my webcam. Sorry about that. But like a guy who's like busting his ass, really working hard, a reg, it would be like -35, -30, and beyond that, you really for me to get beyond that, I had to work so hard to do that. And it was really, I mean, if you have like a really good rejam game, you can definitely. Now, there's also something I want to bring up is if you're on like a really good site where there's a lot of loose action, like if 4 people limp in and you check the big blind, you're not going to recover that big blind nearly as much as if one person raised and you could rejam on them and flat them and wrangle the pot away from them post flop. However, that's still a better site to be on. So like if you're on like America's Card Room or Party, if you're like -40, that's fine, right? Like that's pretty good, but you can get it a little lower. And generally this happens to be like the fastest way to improve your statistics. If we could move to the next slide, please. So being out of position is goofy. A lot of people just don't want to learn how to play out of position. It forces you to make plays that are really uncomfortable. You will feel silly, but it is necessary. You can't afford the luxury of folding. Now, back in the day, everybody was so terrible that you could just fold every single big blind and do not play out of position. Your very basic TJ Cloutier books from at the beginning. And I don't know why I call him Cloutier, but I heard some guy call him that one time, and I laughed my ass off, and I started calling him Cloutier from that day forward. But yeah, like if you read like the original books, it was like, don't play out of position. It's like, that's very convenient. This is like, I'm trying to use another analogy besides baseball. This is like me going up to you. Well, this would be like me going up to you in like soccer and being like, score goals. It's like, well, thank you. Like, that's wonderful, but I can't always do that, But anyway, moving on to the next slide. This is my performance in the big blinds. This is on Poker Stars. In higher stakes tournaments. These are mostly higher stakes tournaments.
Poker Stars is generally thought to be one of the tougher sites today,
right.
I believe.
And you can see my actual overall win rate down there at the bottom is 5 big blinds per 100. So that's mostly high stakes tournaments. If you're playing lower stakes tournaments, it should be around 8 or like 8 would be really good. Like 10 probably means you need to move up a little bit. You're doing really well at those stakes to the point you can move up and infuse some different, more higher buy-ins. 5 is it's like decent at high stakes, but it's not something you should be in love with. But the thing I'm really looking at there is EV big blind per 100. That's 7. And that's good with me because if you're running bad, which by the way, everybody runs bad in MTTs, this is something like, well, I mean, everybody, it's one of those things, people always show me this breakdown. They're like, look, I'm running tens of thousands of big blinds under expectation. It's like, welcome to the club. That's everybody, dude. Like that's most people will have like years they run bad. For reference, one scoop playing all of the high stakes tournaments is between 5,000 to 10,000 hands. So even assuming the maximum number of scoop runs, this is 36 separate scoops, all high stakes events. And you can run thousands of big blinds under expectation in that, and that's perfectly normal. The hardest part of my job is when I look at somebody's position statistics like this, and they have like, their big blind per 100 is like 11, their EV big blind per 100 is like 2, and I get to go, guess what? You get to move down 6 levels. And it's like, but I just won the Sunday Million. It's like, yep, and you shouldn't have. Like, I'm sorry, you just weren't prepared for it. And then there's also guys that, their EV big blind per 100 is like 9 and their big blind per 100 is like 1, right? And which means they just had the worst year of all years. And, I have to talk to their backer because the backer says you suck, you don't play hard enough, blah, blah, blah. And, it's all a bunch of malarkey. Now, what we're going to be looking at, the fastest, your minimum effective dose as far as learning how to play poker really profitably is going to be your big blinds. It is very difficult to add a couple big blinds of profitability to your button. That requires quite a bit of retweaking your 3-betting ranges, your barreling ranges. That's going to be very complex for any coach to teach you. To get the fastest results possible, I have about 1,000 clients with my project Assassin Auto Coaching, which is where a private consultancy would be the highfalutin word. But essentially, I teach people how to play tournament poker. A lot of times, just because of the schedule being so booked, I get about 1 session with somebody. So I had to figure out how to teach them the fastest. And the way to improve people's win rate dramatically was just to focus on that big blind. Because it is much easier to save 5 big blinds per 100 than it is to add 5 in the big blind than it is to add 5 big blinds per 100 on the button, the cutoff, middle position, etc. And you can even go further than that. And as you can see, my EV big blind per 100 in the big blind is -24, which means I am saving about 75% of my big blinds, which is pretty good. In actuality, there's going to be quite a bit more variance when it comes to your big blind statistics because you're usually hanging on with fragments of equity. And that obviously is going to get run over quite often. From the small blind, you can see I'm -10 EV big blind. You can see I'm running kind of good right there, which means I'm saving about 80% of my small blinds. And that's kind of where I want to be. And the more something that's really interesting is looking at the next slide. My performance in the blinds continued, where you can see tournament antes in play is added. Now, with antes in play, okay, I've been running bad for like the last year or whatever it is, but whatever, that's beside the point. Your actual EV big blind per 100 should go down at this stage, just because it's really easy to get like 30, 40 big blinds out of someone at the beginning of the tournament when there's like 200 big blinds deep stacks, and people just really aren't into folding. When the effective stacks are 30 big blinds entirely, and most of the players left are far more talented, it is going to be much more difficult to take that many blinds from somebody. The only place you should be improving from is the big blind, because now in the big blind, you have the antes that are also additionally helping you. And that creates a better pot odds price, which means that when you call there, you do not have to be successful nearly as much. So you can have a bit more of a ragtag style and still turn the same profits. And if you really get good at executing what you're trying to do, you can get that EV big blind right there that I do have, which is -15, which means I do not effectively pay the big blind 85% of the time. If you can imagine a Venetian poker tournament where the tournament director announces, hey, Alexander Fitzgerald is such a nice guy, he's not going to have to pay the big blind 85% of the time in this tournament, you would probably say that's BS, I'm not playing. If anybody gets that kind of advantage, well, you can get that kind of advantage by focusing in on these type of metrics. So let's go ahead to I did not get these numbers.
Well, so I have a few questions coming in for you.
Go for it.
Then after that, we're going to have to pause the video because they can only be roughly 30 minutes long. So, okay, the first question is, how does this apply to people in live poker where you have no stats?
This applies to live poker quite a bit because live poker players tend to, you still are trying to save as many big blinds as possible in the live arena. The antes tend to be really significant. So a lot of the times the raise sizes are bigger, and we're going to actually discuss why that's a really good adjustment that live players make that online players are actually pretty poor at. But what helps you in the live arena is the ante structure is usually so significant that if you can defend your big blind with any regularity, you are going to be saving so many big blinds that it's really going to help you in the long run. The other great thing about live poker is a lot of the plays I'm going to show you how to do rely on two things. One, your opponent not wanting to feel stupid, which is really realized in the live arena where people are going to have to table their absurd hands if they get caught and in front of an audience. And also, it requires you not caring about looking stupid, which obviously people do not like to look stupid in a live arena, but you're going to have to learn that. You're going to have to learn to be a little resistant, socially resistant to the snickering that goes on at live poker tables. The, oh my God, did you see what he did? The people who think they're being really covert about like looking you out the side and doing the tee-hee. If you can get rid of that, you can do a lot of plays that nobody's going to see coming. And that's going to really compound your profits and really help you. The one live, I haven't played many live tournaments over the last couple of years, but recently I got to the final two tables at the 5K at PCA. Almost final tabled it 2 times again. But I finished like 17th or whatever it was, right? And my wife came up to me and she was saying, oh my God, you must be so frustrated. And I was like, well, not really, because all I really did was call out of the big blind a lot and do a lot of my little tricks. And that just kept me going. And I also did some raise sizing tricks that other people were not defending from the big blind well enough. So it helped me gain a few of their big blinds. A lot of what we're going to talk about too is also going to show you what kind of big blind players you should be raising against and taking advantage of. And that was pretty much all I could execute at this table. Everybody else was really good. And I had one hand where I like bet half my chips and then the guy jammed and he just looked so content with himself. You could tell he was one of these guys that there's no way he's going to fold now. And anyway, I did fold and he looked dismayed and, you know, he showed the set or whatever it was, right? But I just kind of kept trucking along and getting deep. And then I used that for a live tournament win in Vegas. It was just, it was a deep stacks. It was for 30K or whatever it was. But it was like, it was really nice. But like, I obviously, I wish I could sit here and tell you I won EPT Barcelona with these strategies. But considering I play about 6 live tournaments a year, it's been working pretty darn well. Any other questions?
That is it for now.
Hello everyone, I am Jonathan Little. I hope you're enjoying this Thanksgiving Day marathon. Let me take a second to tell you about my Excelling at No Limit Hold'em webinars. I wrote the book, Excelling at No Limit Hold'em, 2 or 3 years ago, where I essentially found the best players in the world at their specific area of expertise, right? So for example, for Heads Up No Limit Hold'em, I got Olivier Bousquet, who just absolutely crushes Heads Up No Limit Hold'em. I had Phil Hellmuth write about the strategies he uses with a short stack that have somehow allowed him to continuously make deep runs and win more bracelets than anyone else. We have a few chapters by myself. One is on final tables. I've had great final table results. And we also have some mindset experts who have written on their specific areas of expertise. So what I did after that is I had them make webinars on either similar topics to what their chapter was on or other areas that they are experts in. So we have content from Phil Hellmuth, Dr. Tricia Cardner, Mike Sexton, Alex Fitzgerald, Elliot Rowe, Olivia Bousquet, Scott Clements, and lots more. So normally we sold these for $100 when they were first released, but for today, for Black Friday, they will be $15 each. I want to make sure that you can learn about the specific topics you want from the pros you want, which is why I work with all these pros that I do work with, right? It's important to play well with others. You see a lot of people in the poker community trying to cause trouble, but I think love wins at the end of the day. And working together with other people who want to better the poker community is going to take us all very far. So check that out right now at pokercoaching.com/Black Friday. Find the material you need to take your game to the next level, and let's all prosper together.